Well, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on a two-day visit to Laos, and PM Modi will be participating in the East Asia Summit. On the sidelines of the East Asia Summit, PM Modi had met the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Prime Minister Modi extended condolences on the loss of lives due to Hurricane Milton. We are seeing those visuals. Also now visuals coming in from the East Asia Summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi participating in it. There are 18 countries in all. This grouping was started in 2005. Over a period of time, various members became part of the East Asia Summit. So there are 18 countries, as I said, in all. There are 10 ASEAN member states and there are 8 other countries, including India. These are visuals of a pool aside that happened between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Christopher Luxon, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, also with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And a lot has happened in the bilateral context also between India and Laos PDR. There's so much focus on civilizational and historical ties and cultural ties between the two countries. There's focus on the Buddhist linkages between India as well as Laos PDR, and there's focus on the Ramayana and various temples. So the East Asia Summit process was initiated in 2005 with the convening of the first East Asia Summit in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. East Asia Summit is an annual leaders-led forum for dialogue on broad strategic, political and economic issues in the Indo-Pacific region.
The EAS, as it's called, the East Asia Summit, has been actively striving to contribute to a rules-based approach in managing interstate relations in the region.
The East Asia Summit comprised earlier 16 participating countries, namely ASEAN member states.
ASEAN member states plus 6 other countries. There are 10 ASEAN states, and the Prime Minister had announced the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative during the 14th East Asia Summit. India hosted the 6th East Asia Summit Conference on Maritime Security Cooperation. And
the East Asia Summit Conference was held in Mumbai in July 2024. So there's been active engagement between East Asia Summit partners, India being one of them. Like we've been saying, in 2019, India came up with the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative with focus on ensuring rule of law in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly South China Sea.
Professor Swaran Singh is still with us. Professor Swaran Singh, I mean, apart from of all these 18 countries, Russia is also part of the East Asia Summit process. Not much is being talked about them. What do you think? I mean, with some of the issues that Russia has, I mean, the fact that there are sanctions against them, the fact that there is this military operation in Ukraine going on for indefinitely, all these, could they be raised?
I think first of all, given that 2.5 years plus Ukraine conflict has resulted in stringent sanctions from West on Russia, but also attempt to isolate Russia. And in that sense, this becomes a very significant platform for Russia to be present and visible in global multilateral forums. So, the seasoned foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, is there now in Vientiane. And he's going to raise his own concerns, of course. I hope issue of Ukraine is not brought in, because this is not the region that that want to prioritize a disruptive issue like Ukraine. But it could still come up. Indirectly, Lavrov may have something to say about it. But more interesting, I think it is also to see that this year, Russia also is holding the chair of BRICS nations, and next month, this month actually, is going to be BRICS summit as well. So he is also there to gauge the kind of responses that he's going to get in his bilaterals with a series of leaders of these 17 other countries at East Asia Summit meeting, to see how and what kind of consensus they can achieve in the BRICS summit as well, because members of BRICS are also here. Members of Quad are also in that sense there, and so in that sense he will also be careful in gauging how the Quad is looking at collectively on issue of Ukraine crisis. India, as you know lately, Mark, has been far more active in at least, shall we say, accelerating the process of peace talks becoming a possibility. So I think Lavrov will also have a conversation with the Indian delegation. At what level that happens, we don't know. So Russian presence in East Asia Summit, of which India has always been a great supporter. India has always maintained Russia is as much resident power of Indo-Pacific region as any other country is. So in that sense, I think there is also going to be certain conversation between India and Foreign Minister Lavrov. India is going to be, Prime Minister hopefully is going to the BRICS summit soon. So in that sense, I think Russia is going to take this as an opportunity to be in East Asia Summit with 18 other nations. Indeed, we all remember also how for about 10 years, India is a founding member of East Asia Summit, but both United States and Russia were not allowed to enter despite their, showing interest publicly for about 10 years. 2015 is when Russia and United States came into East Asia Summit meeting. So I think for Russia and for Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, this is clearly an opportunity on eve of BRICS Summit to gauge the mood and of course showcase Russian presence in a major multilateral forum.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Let's take the same question now to Ambassador Dayal. Ambassador, what are your expectations from Russia's participation in the East Asia Summit? Ambassador, are you there with us?
What about the relationship, Professor Swan Singh, between Russia and China? Because I mean, it looks like much is being done to sort of contain the belligerence of China as a expansionist power, and Russia, is at the current time at least, looking to lean on China for other reasons.
I remember we were mentioning 17 plus 1 and you in the break were mentioning 16 plus 2. So I think that's actually better formulation, that it could actually be 16 plus 2, given the fact that February 2022 they had agreed on a joint statement talking about no limits relationship, which has rattled much of the Western world in that sense. So yes, indeed, even in East Asia Summit, you could actually think of 16 plus 2, China and Russia being together in this, and both of them being concerned for the rest of the 16. In fact, definitely to several of the rest of the 16, both Russia and China are in that sense concerned. But because we are focusing here on Indo-Pacific, definitely concern will be much more on China's sort of way of becoming increasingly assertive, particularly in South China Sea. And India is a direct, sort of recipient of that kind of assertive tone and aggressive tone. We have had tensions on the border. India has stood up to, of course, China in all these last 4 years, and the entire neighborhood and world has noticed that India has stood up to China during this period. And therefore, you see, it's maybe piecemeal, but gradual process of finding a kind of reconciliation and going back to what we are saying February 2020 positions on border between India and China. So India definitely also has its own concerns to ensure that India participates in that exercise where effort is fundamentally not very coercive. It's simply the international community expects China to simply follow rules, regulations, norms, conventions, treaties that have built over a period of time. And of course, India stands with China on saying, yes, we need to reform international governance institutions. But then the institutions, norms, rules, regulations that have evolved.
China wouldn't want India to be a permanent member of the UN.
That's of course an ongoing story, yes.
Yes, so let's take this forward with Ambassador Dayal. Ambassador, I was asking you earlier about what are your expectations from Russia's participation in the East Asia Summit. We know a lot of focus is there on China in this summit, but we also know of what was called the no limits friendship, quote unquote, between Russia and China, which they spoke of just before the Russian attack on Ukraine.
Yes, I think in the region, East Asia, Russia is being seen more and more in China's corner, which is of course unfortunate. but Russia is coming under tremendous pressure from NATO and United States as far as Ukraine is concerned, so many sanctions and all of that. And it wants, is leaning more and more on China. So that is a fact. And I think India and some other countries tried to keep the two regions separate. That is the European region and the Indo-Pacific region as far as strategic issues were concerned. And one thought that there can be, maybe there were, Cold War has returned, but there could be two Cold Wars, one in Europe between NATO and Russia, and one in Indo-Pacific between perhaps United States and China. But Russia is being pushed more and more in the Chinese corner in the Indo-Pacific. And unfortunately, the new Japanese Prime Minister also said that Quad could be become, or something could become Asian NATO, which is totally not India's policy, and very publicly and clearly this was made clear by our accelerated minister, etc. So these are straws in the wind, and as Professor Swansingh said, that India is very clear and in its whatever way possible will try that Russia's security interests are respected by the West, and their policy should not be result in Russia going into the Chinese corner. And many strategic thinkers in the West, even President Macron and others, realize this, and they talk about the security interests of Russia. But unfortunately, the present establishment in the United States and NATO is very belligerent against Russia. Well, we are all waiting what happens in the presidential election in the United States. And if President Trump comes back, then there could be a fundamental shift in United States policy towards Russia. And as a former diplomat, I am not in the government anymore. I think India will look at that with some positivity and with some interest. If there is some more negotiations and more understanding of US and Russia with each other, and both should take care of the security interests of the other partner. Ultimately, that is the touchstone. And but that is wait or watch. But at the present policy of United States and NATO, which is so openly and clearly against Russia in general and President Vladimir Putin in particular, we can expect a very strong statement from Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who is a veteran. He has been in the game for more than 25 years with President Putin from day one. When President Putin came to power, so he speaks for the president, President Putin. He knows his mind, and whatever Foreign Minister Mr. Sergei Lavrov says, the world should take as if it is coming from President Putin himself.
Ambassador Tayal, you did mention about Prime Minister Ishiba thinking of an Asian NATO. But of course, maybe Quad, as India stands, should not be that Asian NATO. But is the concept of an Asian NATO completely off the table? I mean, is it something that shouldn't be looked at, considering that I mean the threat is nearer home, NATO is far away otherwise?
I think the world is moving towards plurilateral. So the United States already has an AUKUS. Australia, US and UK. Then they have their security alliances with Japan and South Korea. The India-US defense cooperation structure, if you really see in the direction in which it is moving, and GSOMIA and like all kinds of now our defense officers will be in Florida and some commands of US, etc. So things are happening, and which have a general direction which is clear. But in my view, there is no necessity, requirement to have a formal military alliance in Asia, similar to NATO. NATO's enemy is clear. I mean, they focus on earlier Soviet Union, and unfortunately they continued even when Soviet Union disintegrated. When in fact NATO should have been removed. I mean, it should have been dissolved. Warsaw Pact was dissolved after Soviet Union disintegrated in East Europe. So, but these are facts which one has to deal with. But countries of East Asia and will be well advised not to have any kind of Asian NATO. And we all remember American effort to have CATO and Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. These things are very difficult in East Asia. The historical experiences are different. Europe basically is one cultural civilizational entity, whole of Europe. East Asia is multiple civilizational and cultural and religious entities, and but a very broad understanding kind of on principles can be there, and that's why India in all our bilateral statements when Prime Minister went to Brunei or anywhere, security of the sea lanes, free trade, tranquility. So broad principles are being established and being accepted by our interlocutors, both in bilateral fora as well as in multilateral fora. And the signal is clear to anybody who wants to disturb the status quo, who is taking action to violate the peace and tranquility of East Asia, that all these signals, all these words, all these statements are really directed towards one country, and that is China. So there is no need to have an Asian NATO. I think Prime Minister of Japan is new, so he's just he took over.
He was the
so
defense minister. But let me bring in...
The nuances of these words are very, sometimes there's a lot of history. So one should disregard.
Let me bring in Professor Swaran Singh here. What do you think, Professor Swaran Singh? The ASEAN already is I mean, they have various dialogues, including a defense minister's dialogue. You can look at this East Asia summit also because of the security aspect, assuming a certain defense dialogue component over time. And if Japan's Prime Minister seems to have an idea of a nation NATO, I mean, this is the place to start. In ASEAN and move around. He already may have the support of the ROK, and because they're all, they all have a definite interest in protecting the sea lanes and China.
Also, if I may add, Japan is giving up on its pacifism as well.
That
so
is,
in that context too.
That is absolutely true, but as Ambassador Tayal brought out so beautifully, even if there is a strong sense of need of more teeth in responding to China's behavior, civilizationally this part of the world is not comfortable with military alliances. He did mention how just like NATO was created for North Atlantic, United States after Second World War had created CETO and CENTO here, which did not really survive, and they were never disbanded, but they just became dysfunctional over a period of time, and that is where ASEAN became an important entity, and even today every major nation continues to provide lip service to see ASEAN on the driving seat in that sense in regional dialogues. So yes, there is desirability, but perhaps not feasibility of creating that kind of military alliance driven regional arrangement. Yes, during President Trump's period, particularly the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, you remember his speeches were very harsh. In fact, foreign ministers meeting in Delhi had to issue separate 4 statements, not a single joint statement, because tone was very different. He used to talk about Chinese people and party being different entities. So India's policy on that subject has been absolutely clear and clarified repeatedly, starting with 2018 June 1st speech of Prime Minister in Shangri-La dialogue, then of course 2022 August the speech of Foreign Minister Jaishankar in Chulalongkorn University, India has made it clear India would not like to see the region militarized, and that is where ultimately President Joe Biden in September 2021 had to create AUKUS. Because wherever India is in Quad, India talks of Quad plus, Quad plus plus, which is welcome. Other countries are welcome to join, should not be exclusive club, should not be militarized. So if you look at Quad, at best, the farthest it goes is to look at non-traditional security, piracy, cyber security and so on, not military security in that sense. And ASEAN, which is at the center, is simply from initial focus of United States to sort of controlling spread of communism to then counterbalancing, soft balancing of China. But from late 1990s, from East Asian financial crisis, when China was the first country to jump in and come for their help, because by now China was also having economic heft, changed the equations between ASEAN. ASEAN no longer remained as a sort of countervailing, counterbalancing, soft balancing the regional body for China. Today China has nearly about $700 billion of trade. If you want to compare with India's $130 billion, China has enormous economic relationship with ASEAN. That is why United States chose to create something else called Quad, where major regional stakeholders, Australia, Japan, India and United States, think they can perhaps create situations such that some restraint on China's behavior can be still brought to bear. But because India is the only country in that 4-country group which is not alliance partner and is committed not to militarize the region, I don't see that as a possibility. But we are again saying President Trump might return to White House, maybe Secretary of State Mike Pompeo might return to State Department. We could see that tone coming back, and how India will handle that situation, I think it will be interesting to watch.
Yes. Now, taking the point on Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative further, since you were referring to Quad Plus and Quad Plus Plus, could there be an expansion of the membership maybe this year itself, because this one was launched in 2019. Ambassador Tayal, if I could come to you on this, with 3 ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Thailand and Singapore, and 3 East Asia summit partners, United States, Australia and Japan. Could more join in? This is a non-treaty based and voluntary initiative, its focus being on fostering cooperation for a free, open and rules-based Indo-Pacific. Ambassador Tayal, yeah, please go ahead.
What exactly is the question? That
I'm asking about whether there would be a chance of more members joining in the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. There were 6 members, there are 3 ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Thailand and Singapore, 3 East Asia summit countries, United States, Australia and Japan. This focuses on free, open and rules-based Indo-Pacific. It was launched by India in 2019. This is a non-treaty based and voluntary initiative and remains flexible.
So ASEAN also has its outlook on Indo-Pacific, and there are many...
No, this is India's initiative.
Yes.
That was announced by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2019 at the 14th East Asia Summit.
So it is on one level statement of principles, and principles are very important, and other countries can also join and are welcome to join. But somehow some countries of ASEAN and perhaps very wrongly feel that it is some kind of a group which is anti-China. In my own feeling, I have no concrete facts, but China may have advised some of these countries to keep away from it. That is my guess. I'm not, I mean, my intelligent guess. So China is very sensitive to any kind of statements coming in favor of Quad, for instance, from any member of ASEAN or other countries. So I would think that caution on the part of other ASEAN members and would perhaps continue. And it is better that we state these principles, and if there is any line of action, a concrete action, India takes bilaterally. For instance, we are supplying BrahMos to Philippines.
Yeah.
Philippines. So that may be more fruitful, more productive, rather than going in a collect in this where all countries come, and more countries come. Then my own experience, I am sure Professor Kun Singh will also agree that the organizations lose focus. You know why BRICS is getting expanded. India has some reservations because the whole idea of BRICS was that it was the emerging major economies. And now certain countries which are economic disasters, which are, I will not name them on your forum, but so there has to be some principles and some on which an organization or a group or association is formed.
Right.
And if you just increase the membership, it loses focus and it loses its outcome. So we should be careful, and we should not just think of expansion of membership. What is more important is that whatever is India's objective in establishing that particular partnership, those are pursued bilaterally with our friends in East Asia, even if they don't join that partnership.
Professor
Would you want to
Swansingh,
comment on
India has constantly used soft power, it appears. And now we are amongst the great powers, going to be there. I mean, soon going to be the third largest economy in the world. And the great powers seem to use hard power a lot. So, I mean, is this a sort of problem that India would have moving forward? Because I mean, even in the initiatives that we sort of start, it's voluntary to join, these sort of things, rather than, you know, some sort of method where people are attracted to join for the benefit that India would be in a position to, you know, provide that kind of security blanket.
I think, Mark, there is no doubt that major powers are able to bring in any transformation in global governance primarily driven by hard power. I agree with you. Very often they prefer not to use hard power, and soft power actually becomes effective if in the backdrop there is hard power. So that is perfectly understandable that India will also have to become much more capable in hard power, though it will keep using soft power. What is interesting is that for almost first 6 decades of India's post-independence history, largely the kind of groupings, parties that were in command of the nation were not inclined to yield power, use hard power and demonstrate hard power. They were much more inclined to use conciliation, persuasion, kind of working together, dialogue and all that. Which is not that they neglected hard power, particularly after India-China War of 1962, there was a clear focus on building hard power also, but their preference was not hard power at heart. And the ruling party, which is now in power for 10 plus years, it's not now, from the beginning itself. You remember Yansang used to talk about nuclear weapons from 1960s, even before 1960s. So now the country is in command of the kind of groupings and political power and people who have no qualms in using hard power and wielding hard power, showcasing hard power. Of course, preference again is first to use soft power. So I agree with you that kind of India has changed, world has changed, and now we have a party in command which is not shy of using hard power when it is required, even if preference of course remains dialogue, diplomacy, soft power and so on. What is interesting, and as Ambassador Tayal was also mentioning, when you look at all different major powers that we are discussing have now got focused on Indo-Pacific region, have issued their strategy and report papers and so on. United States and Canada, Germany, Britain, France, so many have issued their strategy papers on how they want to engage Indo-Pacific. That is where India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative comes in as a document, other than 2 speeches that I mentioned, which outline what India thinks. And IPOI brings in what India can bring into the table in delivering leadership in that sense. And because India's vision on Indo-Pacific is closest to ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, that is where in the same summit meeting in 2019, the two had also signed a joint statement saying we want to now develop further cooperation between IPOI and AOIP. And that is where I think what is interesting, what India is bringing to the table is new and novel, because you hear Indian Foreign Minister repeatedly talking about plurilateralism, which is different from multipolarism, minilateralism, multilateralism and so on. Plurilateralism is a conception where you want to create an overarching big themes and have large number of members agreeing to participate in that, but have flexibility of creating small silos. And so it has 6 silos in that sense of focused areas where the membership could be fluid. Not all members of the larger collective have to be a member of each of these silos. So examples of International Solar Alliance, examples of Global Coalition of Biofuels, and now this IPOI is an example which is flexibility and fluidity, where members can sort of keep shifting from one focus area to another focus area, and they could make sure they make best contributions in the focus area where they are coming as a collective, as a smaller group. And since you mentioned whether new members could come in, to me that's not a very serious issue. Members can come in and exit anytime. It's a much more flexible arrangement of plurilateralism, where you want to focus on what you want to achieve and how you want to achieve and what are going to be your partners in moving forward. So in every case you have a larger vision of Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which is where we want to talk about, as I said already, 6 specific areas focused on maritime security, cyber security, same issues are there also. But membership of the larger collective and of the subgroups can be flexible in that sense. So yes, I think that is becoming also increasingly attractive, because members don't feel that it's a hard and fast thing of whole lot of difficult procedures like entering in other groupings like BRICS or SCO. It takes several years for a member to go through the procedures and then finally become a member. India started becoming member of let's say BRICS from 2015 and reached all the way to 2017 when we became a member in that sense. So it is a very different kind of arrangement, and I think new members coming in and leaving is not something as hard and fast situation in that sense.
Yes, it is. The structure is such that it is a non-treaty based, voluntary and flexible initiative, allowing countries to participate based on shared interests without creating new institutional burdens. That's the phraseology that has been used officially. But coming to you, Ambassador, now, the supply chain resilience has been one aspect of the 10-point proposal that the Prime Minister enunciated in the India-ASEAN summit. It is there in the joint statement also that has been issued after the India-ASEAN summit. In the East Asia summit too, do you expect focus to be there, and how big a challenge is the need for diversification and resilient supply chains, considering that China dominates quite a few of them, particularly in the high-tech sectors? Then it also is home to natural resources that are required in making in the materials that go into say solar panels or the electric vehicle batteries, etc. So how big a challenge is this, and do you see these countries being able to navigate it and this being articulated today?
A resilient supply chain is a very, very important and critical issue from many dimensions. We saw under COVID when many of the major supplier for so many goods was one country, China, and the whole supply to the world was disrupted. And many critical components and materials for the future technologies, when one goes toward new technologies, artificial intelligence, etc., whether it is solar cell, lithium, and other rare earths, China has silently cornered 60, 70, sometimes 80% of the supplies of the world. And from Bolivia to Afghanistan also they are trying to corner. So the resilient supply chain is to be addressed both from the supply side of the resources, materials, components, and manufacturing side, that many of the goods are now made internationally with different components coming from different countries. And ultimately, the finished product in many of these was coming from China. So most countries now have a China +1 policy. And in this supply chains, many countries of the ASEAN, like Thailand, Malaysia, to some extent Indonesia, Singapore, they are involved in as suppliers of components, etc. So when resilient supply chain is the goal, and India is playing a major role in that, many countries, Vietnam is playing a major role in that, where quite a bit of manufacturing is shifting to Vietnam also. India is taking a lead in semiconductor chips. That in future, more and more should be manufactured or could be manufactured in India. So this is a direction in which most countries of the world want to move for resilient supply chains. And our objective would be that in these supply chains, the interests and the manufacturing of other suppliers of ASEAN countries should not be affected. So if some manufacturing is shifted to India, or then those same they can continue to supply. So in this, there should be more openness and more unrestricted supply of both raw materials, resources, components, as well as the finished product. And there, the best is, of course, to have many manufacturers for every item or every raw material, and they should be geographically diverse, that not concentrated in one country. So as far as the objective is there, I think there is understanding, and many countries and all the countries of ASEAN would be in support of that. But when you come down to the nitty-gritty and identify those, say, raw materials, rare earths or lithium, or as well as the manufacturing, which has more concentration, and it is said that if any country has more than 50% or so, then it should be looked at it in a more critical way. So first, identification of these raw materials as well as manufacturing capacity, and then how to diversify that. Their collective action will be required. India is now a member of a group where US is also there on rare earths, etc. So first, identification of the problem. Where are the issues where there is some kind of monopoly or near monopoly in these supply chains, and to make them resilient, what action is required, and which country can take that action, or group of countries. I think there's a lot of work already going on in that direction, and ASEAN members will certainly be happy to be a partner in that objective.
Okay, so you expect this issue to figure in the discussions that take place today at the East Asia Summit as well. But we'll take a breather at this point in time. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi has addressed, we understand, the East Asia Summit. We'll tell you what the Prime Minister said and the atmospherics around it. Stay tuned.
Extreme weather events are going to get more frequent and intense. What can we do? Here are some ideas.
In each of the grid, we installed rain gauges, and we identified local people from the villages, and these people were given training how to measure rainfall. And every day, these farmers used to give rainfall data into a WhatsApp group that we had created called Wayanad Weather Forecast.
Sweden started very early to cut out fossil fuels from our energy mix. So that also shows that big, bold changes are possible.
There are 5 to 6 families who have joined us on this journey towards self-sufficiency. We also exchange products and goods.
If we use cork instead of these materials, which are not renewable, cork is, we are decreasing several orders of magnitude.
geopolitics and trade deals. Economic challenges amid development. Hard work and the path to prosperity. It's the economy always. Between walkers, money is what money does and says. Supply creates its own demand. Between the bulls pulls and bears tears. When supply chains globalization and India rises to the podium. We'll get you centered with the economic brief at 8 p.m. every Thursday on DD India.
Complex issues, hidden agendas, twists and turns, strategic games. We think all dots are linked. We just need to connect them. Join me every week as I
Welcome back. You're watching a special broadcast on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Laos PDR for the 19th East Asia Summit, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has already spoken at the summit in Laos. During a speech, the Prime Minister said about the typhoon Yagi. He expressed his deepest condolences to the people affected by the typhoon.
And the Prime Minister noted that India's assistance in providing humanitarian aid through Operation Sadbhav as well. He spoke about that.
Remember, the Government of India had launched Operation Sadbhav for extending emergency humanitarian assistance in the wake of the floods caused by Typhoon Yagi. And there are other things also that the Prime Minister mentioned. For instance, the Prime Minister noted India's support for ASEAN unity and centrality.
And the Prime Minister also reiterated India's interest in peace, security and stability of the South China Sea.
The Prime Minister said that maritime activities should be conducted under UNCLOS, which is the United Nations Convention on Law of the Seas.
The Prime Minister remarked that focus should be on development, not on expansionism.
That's extremely important, the Prime Minister saying, and I repeat, that the focus should be on development and not expansionism.
Prime Minister also noted that India's support for ASEAN approach on the situation in Myanmar. He said he supported ASEAN's approach there.
Yes, there's a 5-point consensus of ASEAN on the situation in Myanmar. So India has supported that approach of the ASEAN towards resolving the crisis in Myanmar. And the Prime Minister also said that countries of the global south are facing negative impact of ongoing conflicts. They are at the receiving end. So the most negative consequences of the ongoing conflicts are being faced by countries of the global south or the developing and underdeveloped world. And the Prime Minister, The
Prime Minister also called for peace and stability to be restored as soon as possible regarding these conflicts.
The Prime Minister said that this is not the era of war. Important statement made in the context of the Russia-Ukraine crisis as well as the tensions in West Asia. PM Modi reiterated that problems cannot be solved on the battlefield. So let's recap the key takeaways from Prime Minister's address at the 19th East Asia Summit in Vientiane, Laos. The Prime Minister expressed his deepest condolences to the people affected by Typhoon Yagi.
Right, indeed. And the Prime Minister also noted that he noted India's assistance in providing humanitarian aid through Operation Sadbhav. Besides that, the Prime Minister noted India's support for ASEAN unity and centrality. Prime Minister reiterated India's interest in peace, security and stability of the South China Sea. PM said that maritime activities should be conducted under UNCLOS. That is the international law that must be followed as far as maritime activities are concerned. The Prime Minister remarked that focus should be on development, not expansionism. PM noted India's support for ASEAN approach on the situation in Myanmar.
So these are the key takeaways from Prime Minister's address to the 19th East Asia Summit. References to development, expansionism, South China Sea, peace, security and stability in South China Sea particularly. References to maritime activities being conducted under UNCLOS. Your thoughts, Professor, on what the Prime Minister said, particularly in the context of the situation in South China Sea?
I think first thing to note is that if Indian Prime Minister is listed to be among the early speakers in the morning, I think maybe soon after the host,
yes,
is a reflection of India's credibility and acceptability in the entire region, which is a good news. Second, I think the Prime Minister began with the mention of Typhoon Yagi, wants to front load that as a main concern, and India's diplomacy, India's naval exercises have lately for about 15 years very focused on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. That has become a kind of important priority for India's foreign policy, which makes India also the first responder very often in most crises. So that was definitely pegged and flagged as first important issue of focus for Indian Prime Minister. He did mention several things that perhaps allude to China's behavior. He mentioned expansionism, which go back to his September 2015 speech from Japan. That issue of expansionism has always been part of his speeches, whether we should be focusing on partnerships or expansion. Third important area, I think specifically as you asked me, is on South China Sea. Whether it was in yesterday's India-ASEAN summit or it is today in his speech to the East Asia Summit meeting, the need to be free and fair and follow rules and regulations as outlined under a United Nations Convention on Law of Seas clearly has a kind of a hint towards what is happening in South China Sea in that sense. And more specifically, I understand he made mention of peace, security and stability being India's concern in South China Sea, which is, I think, going a step forward compared to the formulations that India has had so far. And that should be seen in backdrop of India lately being much more assertive in India-Philippines relationships. Indian Foreign Minister in Manila making a clear mention of India standing by Philippines' right to assert its sovereignty, protect its security, and of course the whole sort of military cooperation, defense cooperation that India-Philippines has, India-Vietnam has, which sometimes Chinese are not most comfortable with India's rising heft in that region. But I think clearly there is a little step forward here in the speech where India is becoming much more clear, much more specific, much more assertive as to how it wants to see the region ensuring peace, stability and security and following norms and rules that exist so far. Without naming China, but it's a clear reference to concerns of India vis-a-vis China's behavior in the region, which, as I keep saying, is a concern of not just India, but definitely of 15 other countries, if not 16, out of the 18 countries that are in conversation today in Vientiane, in Laos capital, as part of East Asia Summit, which is, I think, most powerful, most influential, potentially most game-changing summit meeting for Indo-Pacific region,
yes,
in which India's visibility and credibility has constantly transformed over years.
Yes, we are getting more information on what the Prime Minister said at the East Asia Summit. We'll take you through that. PM Modi called for mutual cooperation in the areas of cyber, maritime and space sectors.
We had ended with the era of war. Then the Prime Minister reiterated that problems cannot be solved on the battlefield.
Yes.
Then he called terrorism a serious scourge, a challenge to global peace and security.
And then
the
PM
Prime
Modi
Minister called for mutual cooperation in areas of cyber and maritime and space.
Yes, and there are other references as well. For instance, the Prime Minister invited all the countries present to the heads of higher education conclave to be held in Nalanda. Remember, Nalanda University is being revived, and PM Modi called East Asia Summit an important pillar of India's Act East policy.
Then he congratulated Prime Minister Sipandan on organizing the summit, and then the Prime Minister also extended his best wishes to the upcoming chair, which is Malaysia, for the rest of the East Asia Summit, for the future summits.
Absolutely, and besides that, sources have told DD India that PM Modi was the first leader to be invited to address the East Asia Summit after the host and incoming chair, that is Malaysia, and this is a recognition of India's role and importance in ASEAN. Sources also say that recognition of PM Modi being the only leader in the room to have participated in the most number of East Asia summits was also there. So the Prime Minister has in fact attended or participated in 9 out of 19 East Asia summits so far. And remember, East Asia Summit started in 2005. India has been a founding member of the East Asia Summit, which has since expanded from 16 countries to now 18 countries.
Indeed, and as Munmud was saying, the Prime Minister was the first leader to be invited to address the East Asia Summit after the host and the incoming chair. That was what Professor Swaran Singh was also saying. It's a recognition of India's role and importance in ASEAN, and attributed to sources, the recognition of Prime Minister Modi being the only leader in the room to have participated in the most number of East Asia summits. 9 out of 19 East Asia summits is where Prime Minister Narendra Modi was present.
So on that note, we'll thank you, Professor Swaran Singh, and also Ambassador Thayal. It was a pleasure to talk to both of you and speak to you with your insightful inputs on Prime Minister's visit to Laos PDR, particularly his participation in the 19th East Asia Summit. And a lot of the issues that we discussed, the Prime Minister did refer to, particularly tensions in the South China Sea, and once again saying that the focus should be on development and not on expansionism.
Indeed, that I think is the key takeaway. India, this is not the era of war. We were talking about all sorts of things about, you know, a possible Asian NATO and all that, but that of course is not something that India supports. India is clearly a power, a rising power that looks at peaceful means and the method to grow which is harmonious, inclusive, and clearly the voice of the global South in a sense.
Yes. So that's it then in this special broadcast on PM Modi in East Asia Summit. We'll take your leave, but news and updates will continue on DD India. Stay tuned for that.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.